So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. This is Ali Azzuddin from 4th Generation for Education, and this is our special day, different perspectives on agency. This is our third session for the morning, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Ilene with me. Good morning.
Good morning, Ali. It's so great to be here. Thank you.
So I would like to ask our attendees to introduce themselves, and then please in that chat choose all panelists and attendees, where you are watching from, what do you do, and we will be talking during this session on developing relationships to increase agency. And I can see that people are watching from Jordan, the UAE, and then we have people from Lebanon, people from South Africa. They've been awake since early morning. Hello, Tracy. So this is the third session in a row. We have people watching from India and many other places for this special day about agency. Just remember two things. If you are sending in the chat, click next to the to choose all panelists and attendees. And if you want to send any question, choose the Q&A. And then again, I can see people are watching also from Egypt and other places. I'm sure maybe some people also started watching us from Europe, because this morning we had also people watching from Europe. I'm going to keep an eye on Facebook chat, because even if you are watching via Facebook, we can interact with you and we can read your reflection and we can read your questions. So now I can see people are watching from Bangkok as well and many other places. So we're ready to give it a start. Let's go.
Sounds good, Ali. I'm excited to start. So I am, okay. As Ali introduced me, I am Ilene Winokur. I have lived in Kuwait since 1984. I was born in the US, Buffalo, New York, to be exact. And I moved here and got married, raised 3 children, and by accident in 1996 got involved in teaching and haven't left it since. I have 25 years experience in education, which includes teaching elementary grade levels and also being a principal. Actually ended up being a pre-K to 5 principal at one of the private schools here in Kuwait with an American curriculum. And then I also went back for my doctorate to Lehigh University, where I got my doctorate in educational leadership, and then came back to teaching, and I was teaching pre-college learners in intensive English. And then I became the director of the program, and I retired from full-time work in 2019, but because education is my passion, I'm still working with refugee students and leaders and teachers, also providing professional development for them and also teaching intensive English to them. And I have also started blogging. I started almost 2 years ago blogging about my journey to belonging, figuring out how I felt at home in Kuwait and also the United States. That led me to podcasting and interviewing others about their feelings and their ideas about belonging. And then, of course, I'm a PD specialist. I've been offering professional development for many, 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 many years here regionally and also internationally. My hashtag is belonging before bloom, and I think once I finish this session, you'll understand why. Bloom, of course, is Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive thinking and going up the hierarchy to make sure that we are having our students analyze and synthesize. But before we do that, we need to take care of their social emotional side. And that's my website, which I'll also show you later on. I have a lot of resources about belonging on the website, so be sure to check it out. So the session questions I'm going to be looking at today is kind of broad. but I want you to see belonging and agency and how they fit together, but specifically self-belonging, and I'll define that in a minute. And then how do we support its growth in our learners? So how can we be more intentional about growing that sense of self-belonging in our students? Because it often doesn't happen naturally. And then what is the relationship between self-belonging and learner agency? You might say to yourself, okay, I thought this was a session about relationships and agency. Why are you talking about belonging? Well, they're very highly related. And the more I read the research and the more I read about other practitioners, the more I realize how interrelated they are. And then how can teachers create a safe classroom environment for that safe sense of belonging and the sense of agency? How can we encourage student agency in our classrooms through building those relationships? And then for you to think, actually the whole time, but especially towards the end, how will you get started, or how have you started, and how will you be more intentional about your practice as you learn from this session? So I talk about self-belonging, and there are others who do, but I define it as that whole spectrum of how I feel about myself in general, not just as a learner, but all of us. How do we feel about ourselves? The self-confidence, our worth. Do we feel that sense of self-worth? Do we feel worthy when people tell us, you really did a great job? Or are we embarrassed about the fact that somebody has recognized our worth? Self-efficacy. This is really important for our learners, but also for us as adults. Do we feel capable of growing and learning? Do we have that growth mindset? Or do we have that fixed mindset, and do we think to ourselves, I don't think I can get any better at this, whether it's math or cooking or drawing or anything in our lives? What is our self-efficacy? What do we believe about our ability to learn and grow? Self-regulation, which is directly related to co-regulation, which is related to our relationships with others. In order to be able to self-regulate our behavior and our emotions, we need to be able to connect in a healthy way with others. So if we're talking about in a classroom, that's how are we relating to our peers? How are we relating to our teachers, our supervisors, the principal, our counselors, and so forth. And then also our self-esteem. Do we really feel good about ourselves? So it's not just the sense of confidence, it's the sense that I really know I can do it. I'm happy while I'm doing it. And if someone pushes back at me about something, an opinion I give or something I do, I am able to respectfully respond to that without caving, without feeling that, oh, maybe I'm doing it wrong. So I have that self-esteem. So I want to tell you a story about me. Growing up, I did school, and we often hear that students who are compliant and who do school. And I was very compliant. I was extremely shy and extremely patient. I went to school and I did what my teachers told me to do, but I never really, there were only a few cases in specific teachers' classrooms where I felt a sense of belonging and I felt confident about my learning. But otherwise, for most of my years in school, I really was just doing school, to the point where by the time I reached high school, I couldn't wait to leave school. Now, that sounds strange for somebody who fell into teaching and loves education, but I really didn't like school and I couldn't wait to leave. And so I graduated early, a whole year early, which looking back now was probably a mistake because I entered college at age 17 and I don't think I was ready for university. But that's another story. So we need to think about, as we're reflecting, as you're listening to me today, think about what all of your students, what kind of student you were. Were you that compliant student? Or did you really feel that sense of agency that sense of self-belonging, that sense of confidence in your abilities to learn? Or were you just doing school? So I want to just talk a little bit about agency and what that is. So just agency is, when we talk about agency, because I talked about belonging, self-belonging. So how does that relate to student agency? Agency is allowing students voice, choice, and the autonomy. So it isn't just voice and choice. We aren't just giving them the ability to choose a project or choose the way that they're assessed, or perhaps doing a video or an audio of what their feelings are, allowing them to voice their opinions. It's giving them the autonomy so that they feel that they are somewhat independent of the teacher. So it's this gradual release of giving them voice and choice, but also allowing them so that they're not constantly coming to you and saying, am I doing this right? If you have students who are always asking you, am I doing this right? Then that autonomy piece might be missing. So I want you to think about, what do you think is the connection? Now that I've told you a little bit about self-belonging and a little bit about student agency, what do you think? Take a minute to sort of put your ideas in the chat. What do you think the connection is between those two things?
So our first reflection, Yamini is saying, when learners have agency in the classroom, they will possess self-belonging.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I'm inviting all the people watching on Facebook and the people watching here on Zoom to share with us the answer to this question. And then I'm getting now all these answers, big paragraphs. So when learners have agency in classroom, they take ownership of their learning.
That ownership is an extremely important. Yes, it's empowering to them.
When students are agentic learners, they take their learning and they feel the sense of belonging.
Excellent.
When students feel that they belong to an environment, they will feel that they have voice and they can be heard.
Yes.
According to Ahmed, they are two faces of the same coin.
Oh, interesting.
It will make them more confident and they will enjoy the learning.
Mm-hmm.
Samah is watching on Facebook and I'm reading aloud her feedback. Samah is presenting the early year session this afternoon. So empowering self-belonging is empowering autonomy, and thus agency is natural in the classroom.
Interesting.
Voilà.
Yes.
I have plenty of ideas coming in the chat. Just let me remind everyone, next to the word "to" in the chat, if you choose all panelists and attendees, then everyone will be able to read all these valuable reflection. Majid, I'm taking the final comment. Self-belonging is enriched by agency. At the same time, self-belonging leads to more authentic agency.
I love that, because there is kind of a chicken and egg. Yes. So which comes first? Agency, self-belonging. Do they come at the same time? And from the comments, it seems that there's a mix of that. So I love that you ended on that comment, Ali, because I think that's really important, that we look at them as being intertwined, and sometimes it's hard to pull them apart. We need to look at them together. And we need to be more intentional about how we look at that and ensure that our students have that. So this is from a website, Mindset Works. There are a lot of resources there. I highly suggest that you check them out. They go into a lot more detail than I have time to do today. This graphic, to me, is really important in how we look at our own teaching, and also how we look at education in general. So obviously this appears to be similar to, if those of you who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so we start with the physiological needs, which are food, safety, and love. Now, initially, I had put, so I've added this self-belonging. It's not on Mindset Works graphic, but I think that initially I had put self-belonging with physiological needs. And there is a sense of belonging that does belong with love and relationships and physiological needs. And if you read Dr. Stephen Porges, who speaks about the vagal theory related to the fact that we internally in our systems have reactions to belonging. But I think the self-belonging more specifically, that those things that I talked about earlier really have to do with our learning mindsets, right? And if you look out here, you'll see that student agency is that combination of learning mindsets and learning strategies and habits. So if we think about learning mindsets, what are we talking about? I belong in this learning community. So I feel that sense of belonging. I have a place here. I have a voice here. I am in a growth mindset rather than I'm sitting here and doing school because I told that I need to be here and I need to learn in order to graduate and get a job. But no, I feel that the learning is exciting. I feel empowered by the learning and that I can change my abilities through effort. That's that self-efficacy. I can succeed, and this work has value and purpose for me. There's a reason why I personally want to learn this information. And often what we see is that students learn because we've told them to learn it, because they need it for the test, or they need it for the next subject, or the next topic, or the next unit. But we want them to be able to learn because they want to learn. And so we need to intentionally do that practice. And what comes at the top is the quality instruction, guidance, and experiences. And so you would say to yourself, doesn't that come first? Aren't we, aren't the students supposed to be learning, and isn't the curriculum really important, and the activities we do in the classroom? Yes, it's all really important, but if we don't set the stage for them to feel empowered or involved or engaged in their learning, then what happens is every year the teacher complains that the year before they didn't learn multiplication, they didn't learn addition and subtraction, they didn't learn the social studies concepts, they didn't learn verbs and nouns. Why? Because they were just doing school and they really didn't internalize that learning. So that's why we need to look at this. And I like this graphic because it doesn't mean that we need to think about those things last. It means that in order for us to set the stage for the students to really learn, if we're talking about learning, internalizing that learning, we need to look at their learning mindsets, their self-belonging, their sense of agency with their learning strategies and habits. And we need to guide them to get those, to acquire those. So how do you create relationships with your students to increase their sense of belonging? Okay, that's the title of this session, right? Relationships, agency. Now I threw in here belonging. So what are those relationships? And now that you know a little bit more about the importance of that self-belonging piece with the agency, whether it's before, after, or together, how do you create those relationships in your classroom? So if you can throw that in the chat.
Yes, so while I'm waiting for these comments, I would like to highlight the idea of taking really the time at the beginning of the year to know the student, because once we know them well, according to Rawan, we can give them the choice, we can give them the voice and the ownership of the learning. And according to Lana, we ask them what they want to learn more about. and what are their strengths or what are their challenges. And we discussed this whole idea also in the morning session of knowing your student to be able to support them. Ginal is adding this new word, or a word that is very important, the co-construction of the learning. And so they are with us. We allow them to express their feeling and emotions. We understand them, we appreciate them. So and these are the ideas that I'm getting. We encourage them according to Muna, and well.
Yeah, you know, it's really important that we are doing it, as you said, Ali, from the very start of the year, the very first day. But that
I would like to add one more,
yeah.
And then ask them, how do they prefer to learn?
Yes, yes. Their learning style is important. Their sense of their, I call them their strengths, their superpowers. And often we have to point those superpowers or those strengths out to our students, because often they've been told so much about the things that they can't do that they really don't recognize the things that they can do. And so recognizing those as the year progresses is really important. Starting out that first day is extremely important. I know that with virtual learning, teachers were quite worried about being able to create those relationships. And so some simple things that we could be doing is making sure that we're meeting and greeting our students first thing, just like you did, Ali, when people first joined, to make sure that they feel welcome, to make sure that they feel at home, to make sure they feel recognized. And also, yes, asking them about what kinds of things they like, getting to know our students very well as soon as we can, and making sure that they feel comfortable telling their stories and talking about themselves, so that during the year when things get difficult for them, or they're having problems with whether it's personally or academically, that they feel comfortable because you've established this trusting relationship with them. The trust is really important also. And the fact that they feel that you're being fair with them. And that you see them. You know, we all want to be seen, and our students especially want to be seen. And so if we recognize them and give them credit for the things that they're doing, and gently encourage them to improve on those things that they need help with, they'll be further along at the end of the year because of it. So some of the things that all of you mentioned are mentioned here. So relationships begin with respect, and that goes both ways. So respecting our students and their abilities, and having them respect us and their peers. Many of us do that at the beginning of the year with guidelines or norms for the classroom, involving your students in that from the very beginning of the year and letting them create those norms is very helpful for them, because then they recognize the kinds of things that they would like to see. Later on in the year, if they fall out of it, you're able to remind them that it's something that we agreed on from the beginning of the year. Acceptance is really important. Now, acceptance is sometimes difficult because acceptance is unilateral. We accept for everything. Not that we accept poor behavior, but we accept you for your authentic self. So whether you're a language learner, whether you have special needs, whether you're a student who excels or a student needs a little bit longer to learn certain parts of the subjects, acceptance is really important, and they need to feel that from their teacher. And you see teamwork and collaboration here, and you might say, well, aren't they the same? I look at teamwork as really each person on the team taking a role and making sure that the whole team comes together and excels, creates, completes, all that they need to do in order to be successful. So whatever task that is, that teamwork, whether it's partnering with someone, whether it's a group experience, and often we hear students who say, well, I don't really want to be in a group because I'm always the one who ends up doing all the work. Okay, so this is where teamwork comes in. It's my responsibility as part of the team to pull my weight. And so establishing this from the very beginning will help you when you get to collaboration. So the collaboration piece is the respect for each other, listening skills, being able to give my opinion, listen to someone else's opinion, being able to move the work forward. So collaboration to me is a little bit broader than teamwork. It's part of the teamwork, but it's also being able to work with people with different levels of abilities, and again goes back to that respect and acceptance. Inclusion is also really, really important in establishing those relationships. A lot of the time that I was in school, I talked about my story at the beginning and how I was just doing school, is because I didn't really feel included. I always sort of felt like the fifth wheel or the sixth wheel. I had a different way of thinking about things. My parents were very involved with different organizations and they read a lot. My father read the New York Times every day, and we would have fairly intellectual or high level discussions. Not that I felt like I was any smarter than anybody else or knew more than anybody else, but I felt that sometimes my opinions weren't really included. And because I was shy, I sort of held back on offering those opinions. I was often the last person to raise my hand. So it's really important, again, with being intentional. And I remember when I first started teaching, I didn't have any teaching background initially. I did go back and get my teaching certification. But when I first started teaching here in Kuwait, I was teaching third grade. And I remember my supervisor, my principal, coming in to observe me. And after the observation, she sat down with me and she said to me, Eileen, do you realize that, and I had a very small class because the school was new. We had just opened up. We had like I had 10 or 15 students in my class. And so she said to me, do you realize that you're usually asking the students to answer who raise their hands? And I thought to myself, really? I'm doing that? I didn't realize that. I thought I was asking around the class. And she said, no, you know, that not every student is going to raise her hand in order to answer. She might be shy. And then I thought about myself when I was growing up and that I used to do that. I just used to sit there and say, teacher, don't call on me. You know, I'm afraid I might get the wrong answer. And here I was doing the same thing. So again, I thanked her. You know, I think she was worried about offending me, but I said, thank you very much. And I never forgot it. Now, mind you, that was 25 years ago or so. And I still remember that lesson from her. So it's really important for us to make sure that we're being inclusive. Sometimes we're just not. Okay. So what I'd like you to do again in the chat, because I like this interaction and I'm glad we are interacting. This is wonderful. And thank you, Ali, for reading the comments. How can you or do you encourage learner agency? So if we're talking about having a growth mindset and feeling a sense of self-belonging, which is all of those things, and then being able to be the agent for our own learning, how do we encourage that? How are you doing it already in your classrooms, or how can you do it? What new ideas do you have now that you've listened to some of what I've explained to you?
So first feedback, getting in the chat, make sure that each student gets a chance to answer. Be patient till they think of the answer. Don't answer it yourself. So go back to the ones who took time to think of an answer. I would say talk less, listen more, and giving them challenging tasks from the people watching on Facebook. Use strategies like think, pair, and share.
Excellent.
Give them the voice. make them feel comfortable to answer, even if the answer is not correct. Share with them your goals, make it visible, give rooms for discussion, welcome all answers, encourage the student to share what they have learned. Wow, this is becoming very fast now. Let them.
I'm glad they're all responding. That's great.
Yes,
We'll all
yes,
hopefully
yes.
be
We
able
have
to
a
go back and look at
nice,
them later.
big group interacting. But if
Nice.
they are not able to see all the responses, it's because some people, they are sending only to panelists.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah.
Being inclusive. I use the flipped classroom. Dua is saying I tried it with math classes this year and the students were very motivated. So allow them to reflect on their learning journey. Reflection is very important. I totally agree. And allowing learners to answer using various means and various way, use some technological tool for interaction, and they are mentioning Padlet, Flipgrid. Okay, so Amreen is asking what is a flipped classroom. So now you are going to take agency and then you will inquire about this. So flipped classroom is when the teacher prepare a lesson and then ask from the student to watch it at home, and then the following day they will come and discuss it inside the classroom. Yes. So explanation is happening outside the class, and then reflection and discussion are taking place inside the classroom. You can find plenty of resources about this concept also on the internet. Create a culture of inquiry, creativity, and curiosity. Offer open-ended tasks. So all these are the ideas that I'm getting in that chat, Eileen.
That's wonderful, because it sounds like they were reading my mind or looking at the rest of my presentation. Because I'm going to put a lot of those ideas together, and thank you all so much for sharing all of that. That is so valuable for everybody else. You see, someone learned about flipped classrooms now, just from what you were saying. And yes, the tech tools are important when they're chosen for the right reasons. So yes, definitely integrate tech into, and there are a lot of really easy types of tech, ed tech that you can use, like Padlet, Flipgrid, Wakelet, and so forth. So ways to promote learner agency, many of these things were mentioned already, but I want to put them into a specific context that some of you may not be aware of. So yes, someone mentioned inquiry, very important. We want the culture and inquiry mindset. We want that idea that it's okay for students to ask questions, because often in a classroom, what happens, although we're not seeing it as much now as we used to, those traditional classrooms where the teacher is the knowledgeable one, imparting the knowledge to the students. When we're talking inquiry and many of the things that all of you are saying about offering student agency and inquiry, we're talking about putting ownership on the students. And earlier in the discussion, I know Ali mentioned, somebody also mentioned empowering them and having them take ownership, which is really important. We want relevance over engagement. Now, I put this here because I took it from, and you can see this link here. Engagement is a really misunderstood word. Okay, it's one of those education buzzwords that I sort of rankle at when I hear it. But I think everybody here probably understands it as students being engaged in the learning and that they learn from it. So I attended a session with Grant Wiggins, who was, along with Jay McKay, he put together the Understanding by Design. And he talked about engagement as it's not just throwing something against the wall and hoping that it sticks, right? We want to make sure that our learners are engaged in a way that they have ownership of the learning and eventually take it on. What I used to tell my students in intensive English, especially like about grammar or structure of an essay, but grammar especially, I would tell them, once you hear it in your head, meaning you've taken ownership of that grammar point, Once you hear it in your head, when you read it on the page and you're editing, you will know if it's right or wrong. But until you own it, that learning, you won't be able to correct yourself. So we want relevance over engagement. So we don't want just them engaging in and being entertained. We want to make sure that they feel connected to what they're learning. We want to share learning outcomes. So I know this is something that that is talked about when we talk about backward design or standard-based learning. We want to make sure that when students start a new unit, a new lesson, they are given what the learning outcomes should be. Just like in the beginning of a presentation, you want to know, what am I going to learn today? What am I going to learn during this session? That way I can focus my mind on those ideas and not be distracted by other things. So we want to make sure we share learning outcomes with our students before we start a lesson or before we start a unit. And it should be in language terms that they will understand. So if you have English language learners, you have special needs students, you have younger students, you want to make sure that your learning outcomes are understood by your students. And you want to give ongoing feedback, constructive feedback, focused feedback that will really target what the student needs to know in order to improve. And you want ongoing reflection and then publishing. Now, some of you may already know what I'm going to next with all of these things. And some of you may be new to this, but I want to talk about project-based learning to promote learner agency. Because the more I've learned and studied about belonging, specifically self-belonging and selfness, okay? And agency, learner agency, where the learner takes ownership of their learning. We really look at project-based learning. And so many of those things that Ali mentioned were in the comments are included here. So let's look at, the website is pblworks.org. They have a lot of free resources, a lot of information about how to get started. They have rubrics and videos and things like that. So when we're talking about a project, which could be a week, it could be a month, it could be all year long. It depends on what kind of project you're talking about. You start with a challenging problem or question, something open-ended, okay? And that brings to mind all kinds of ideas. So for instance, I know that there are a lot of teachers globally, but especially in this region and in Europe, who use the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to frame some of the content that they're teaching in their classrooms. So they either integrate some of the skills with English, social studies, science perhaps, or English and science. And so if we're talking about, for instance, SDG 4, which is making sure that everybody in the world has education and is educated, that it's available, and that we don't have child labor and things like that. The challenging problem or question you could think of would be maybe how can we ensure that every child in the world receives an elementary education? Okay, that's a really broad question. But if you open that up to your students, I'm sure that they have ideas. And then along the way, we talk about sustained inquiry. So we aren't just coming up with one answer. We're coming up with answers that will lead us to possibly other questions, which we'll want to answer. And throughout the project, we're looking for answers to the different. So one idea will lead us to another question. Well, so if we ask this broad question of how can we ensure that all children around the world, then somebody might say, well, what about children who are in refugee camps? Or what about children who suffer from poverty and they need to support their families? What about children who end up being orphans and or children who are homeless? how do we make sure that they get an education? And so, or just how do we ensure that all children get an education so that they become agents of their own learning, right? Even in a privileged society where education is available or even mandated, like the United States, Europe, the Gulf, and so forth, you have to stay in school till the age of 14 or 16. Everybody is enrolled in school. How can we ensure that the education that they're getting will help the world in the future? So are they getting education that is meaningful? Then we want to make sure that what we're giving them as a project is authentic. It has meaning. Does it have a connection to something in their local community, in their school, in their family, in the region, okay, in their country, or maybe global? Can we connect them with other students, with other classrooms, with experts? We want to make sure that it's authentic. And then you'll see, again, the student voice and choice. There again is the agency. The student voice and choice, because we've made it authentic, students have voice and choice. They begin to take charge of what their project looks like. Of course, you have rubrics, you have guidelines, you have things that you want to ensure that from content standards or outcomes that you want to be sure that the students accomplish. But within that, there is always room for student choice and voice. And some of you mentioned that. So if you give them choice of what ed tech tools that they could use, whether they want to produce a video or an audio, whether they want to make a podcast, whether they want to draw, you know, what are their strengths, what are their superpowers, and how can we draw that out in them? If they're working on a team, are they using their strengths? Does their team recognize what strengths they have? And are they working in a group so that each one in the team is able to use their strength? Are we focusing on things that need improvement, and are we enabling them to do that also? Because we just don't want them using what they're strong in. We also want them to realize what they need improvement in. Otherwise, they won't get better. Then reflection, PBL Works talks about reflection being ongoing, that we shouldn't wait until the end, not for us as educators, as the teacher who's doing this project, or the students who are involved in this project. We shouldn't wait until the end to look back and say, how did it go? We should be reflecting along the way. So when you plan out your project, you look at the times within the sort of chunked areas of the project where students could have a chance or should have a chance to sit back and reflect on where they're at. And so that may be at a point after they finished inquiry. And you say, and they sort of look at where has their inquiry started? Where did it end? Have they gone far enough with their inquiry? Do they know where they're going next? Okay. And so reflection should be ongoing. It doesn't have to be daily, but it needs to be put within the chunking of the project, the planning of the project along the way. And then critique and revision. So of course, peers learn how to critique each other. They might exchange it with another group. They might present it as a sort of an elevator speech and get feedback before they actually go to their public product. And at the end, PBL Works talks about a public product. And that could be for the learner's parents. It could be for the school community. It could be for a government agency. It could be a global, for experts, for a panel of experts, depending on what that project is. And again, I mentioned SDGs, but there are a lot of different kinds of projects out there that could be related to the content that you're teaching them or something that they're reading. So the public product is something that they present to everybody. And so now I know I waited till the end, but I did give you time to reflect along the way in the chats, right? Those were reflections that you did along the way, reflecting about what you do, reflecting about what you're learning. So I did sort of chunk it, but at the end here, I would like you to think about, and you can put it in the chat or not, or you could just write it down for yourself. What's the first step you will take to support student agency in your classroom based on what you learned today? Because it seems like many of you already came into the session with a lot of ideas about what student agency is, which means that you're already doing some of that in your classroom, which is wonderful. I'm very gratified to hear all of that. But is there something additional that you would do or something that you would like to share now? Maybe it's not the first step you will take, but what will you do when you get back to your classroom or when you start the beginning of next year? What thing might you do differently or more expansively or expand on than you were doing
So I'm getting
before?
plenty of feedback,
Oh,
Eileen.
yay.
So make the learner comfortable, ask them to set their personal goal, trust them, respect, engage, and inspire.
Inspire.
Give them more than before. Let them feel the self-belonging, keep them
Yes.
informed of what is expected, give them the chance to design their classroom environment, and many more
Ah, I love it.
decisions to be taken.
Yeah, we really need to let them make decisions. I love that one. When I tell you a really quick story.
Yeah, go
When
ahead.
my children were, well, actually, my son was about to graduate high school back in 2003, and they shut down the schools because of the war in the region. And I sat down with my children, and we decided that we were going to stay in Kuwait during it because he was supposed to graduate. We didn't know how long schools were going to be closed and so forth. My husband wasn't here at the time. He was out of the country with my mother-in-law. When he came back and he found out that I had sat down with my three children who were 17, 15, and 12 at the time, he said, "You let them help you make a decision?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, of course. I guided them and everything like that. But, my son was going to be going on to college in the United States afterwards. He wasn't going to have us around. So how was he going to know how to make a good decision?" And I said to him, "What do you think? You sprinkle fairy dust on them and they know how to make a good decision?" So that's all to say we need to be intentional on giving those opportunities. So I love the fact that making decisions in the classroom and giving them that power to make a decision about what the flexible environment looks like in the classroom, class norms and so forth, really, really are important. Thank you all for sharing. That's wonderful.
Okay, so if anyone would like to ask Eileen a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. And you can see as well here all the social media of Eileen. So Eileen, would you like to share anything about the slide?
Yes, just this is my website, journeys2 with the number 2 belonging.webstarts.com. You'll find, and I'm always adding because it's a wakelet, is resources about self-belonging, a separate one about personal belonging, another one about professional belonging, links to my blog posts and my podcast are there also. And so, yeah, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Ilene Winokur for those who want to join me.
Very good. So
Yeah.
very informative session, and we started getting all the thank you. So you have the QR code here, and you have the Wakelet link as well. You can
This is
check
a
them.
specific
Yeah.
resource for creating a classroom community, which isn't on my website. I wanted to make sure that for those, again, I'm always adding to this resource. So if you either capture the QR code or take down the
Link.
site, the link, then you'll be able to find the resources.
Good. And before we say thank you to everyone, let me share my screen now.
Mhm.
And I would like to show you on our YouTube channel, you can find these 100 or maybe more webinars that I've been doing during the last year. They are in French, in Arabic, and in English. We are going to have now a short break. And after the break, I will be speaking in Arabic and I will have a guest speaker with me, Nancy. We will be trying to define the word agency in Arabic. And I kept the title agency bil Arabi on purpose. So for all our Arabic speakers, so they can come and unpack this concept with us. All the early years educator, please feel free to join us. And Samah will be sharing how agency look like in early years classes. If you are a specialist teacher and you are interested in knowing about more agency in art classroom with a lot of examples, join Mark, and we will wrap up the day with Lou becoming agentic educator. So, and I would like to highlight that if you are interested in paid events and you want to wrap up this academic year with a workshop on the concepts and learning that transfer, you can join us. This event is happening in 2 weeks from now on a Saturday afternoon. So that's it. Eileen, any final words from you?
I just want to thank everybody for participating and adding their ideas, and also to you, Ali, for putting together this day of learning and professional development, and for all that you do for the community. Really, really appreciate being here today, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.